The first time I saw a human ship, I thought someone had made a terrible mistake, not a navigation error, not a miscalculation in the quantum fold coordinates. No, I mean someone, somewhere in the long and celebrated history of the Galactic Deathworld Council had made the catastrophic, brain-melting, absolutely unforgivable mistake of actually inviting the humans. My name is Vora, quite probably going to die today. Yes, that is my real name. No, my parents were not optimists. I am a Threlian, a species of six-limbed, bioluminescent bureaucrats who have spent 4,000 years carefully avoiding anything that might be considered exciting. We are, by reputation and by proud tradition, the most boring species in the known galaxy. We document, we archive, we file, we attend meetings and take extremely detailed notes and then file those notes and then file the filing receipts. It is a beautiful life, a safe life. Or at least it was. Then came the humans. The Council of Deathworlds was not, as outsiders sometimes assumed, a club for the most dangerous species in the galaxy to sit around and congratulate each other on being terrifying. It was in fact an administrative body, a very old, very structured, very dignified administrative body that existed to regulate conflict, arbitrate territorial disputes, and ensure that no single species became powerful enough to destabilize the wider galactic order. There were 42 member species. Each one was powerful. Each one was in their own way frightening. The Vren could survive vacuum exposure for up to 40 minutes. The Dakraks had 11 forms of natural armor and breathed methane like it was a fine perfume. The Sarathi were telepathic, hive-minded, and had exactly zero sense of personal space. But there was one species that had never been invited. One species the Council had collectively, quietly, and very firmly agreed to simply leave alone. Not because they were weak. Oh no, not even close. They were left alone because the Council's finest analysts had looked at humanity's homeworld, humanity's biology, humanity's entire species history, and had produced a report so alarming that the Council had immediately classified it, sealed it, and pretended it did not exist. The planet Earth had tried to kill its own dominant species approximately 47 times in recorded geological history. 47 separate extinction-level events. Ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, asteroid impacts, gamma-ray bursts, magnetic pole reversals. Each time the dominant life forms had been wiped out, reset, forced to start over. And yet here was this one species, this stubborn, loud, absolutely unreasonable species that had clawed its way up through all of it, survived all 47 of those world-ending catastrophes, and then, as if that were not enough, had looked out at the stars and said, yes, let us go there too. The analysts had called it problematic persistence. I had a different word for it. I had several, actually, none of which I will repeat in polite company. The message arrived on a standard Tuesday, which is, I would argue, the most offensive part of the entire story. Not a dramatic Monday, not an ominous Friday, a Tuesday. The humans had sent a formal request for council membership on a Tuesday, the way one might schedule a dental cleaning or pick up a takeaway order. Incoming transmission, said my assistant, Pelvo, a young Threlian barely out of his documentation certification program. He was holding his tablet with both upper and lower limbs, which meant he was nervous. Pelvo only used all 6 limbs when he was nervous. It is from Earth. Earth, I repeated. Yes, the Earth. There is only one, Ambassador Vora. Right. I straightened my filing sash and tried to look dignified, which is what Threlians do when they are in fact deeply terrified. Put it through. The transmission was not a video, it was not an audio message. It was a single, perfectly formatted document written in 17 galactic standard languages with flawless grammar, requesting formal admission to the Galactic Deathworld Council. Attached was a 73-page summary of humanity's technological achievements. Attached to that was a 400-page appendix on human military capability, and attached to that, in what I can only describe as an act of psychological warfare, was a brief personal note that read, "Hello, we found your signal. We figured out the language. We have been ready for a while. We would like to join, please. We brought snacks." They brought snacks to a request for membership in the most powerful interstellar governing body in the known galaxy. They brought snacks. I filed 17 different incident reports before breakfast. The emergency session was called within 48 hours. All 42 member species were present, which was unprecedented. Usually we could not get more than 30 to show up even for budget reviews, but apparently Earth Wants In was the kind of invitation that made even the Vren cancel their scheduled conquests and the Sarathi emerge from their collective meditation cycles. The council chamber was a masterpiece of galactic architecture, a rotating sphere of transparent alloy and ancient stone, built at the gravitational center of the neutral system known as Axis Prime, Every species had a section calibrated for their atmospheric preferences. The Dakrux section was thick with methane mist. The Vren section was aggressively cold because the Vren found warmth offensive. The Sarathi section was simply labeled "Do not make eye contact" on all the signage, which was a guideline I had always found deeply reasonable. I was seated in the Threlian section, which was climate-controlled, ergonomically sensible, and had very good lighting for note-taking. I had 7 styluses ready. I was prepared to document everything. This was, I told myself, just another council meeting. Just paperwork. Just procedure. Then the human ship arrived and I ran out of styluses. It was not one ship. I want to be very clear about that because the transmission had been politely singular, referring to our delegation as though it might be a modest group of perhaps 3 to 5 diplomats, possibly with a small escort vessel and a fruit basket. What arrived at Axis Prime was a fleet. Not a war fleet, the humans were at pains to clarify later. A diplomatic fleet. Apparently humans brought a full diplomatic fleet the way other species bring a briefcase. 40 vessels. 40. Ranging from sleek long-range scout ships to what could only be described as a mobile space station that had clearly been retrofitted from something that was at one point a weapons platform. The lead ship was called the UNES Perseverance, and it was, I will admit, genuinely beautiful in the way that a very large, very sharp knife is beautiful. Elegant and entirely capable of ruining someone's afternoon. But that was not the part that stopped every conversation in the council chamber dead. The part that stopped every conversation was the battle damage. Every single human ship in that fleet was scarred. Hull plating patched and repatched, scoring marks from plasma fire across the bow sections. One ship, the one just behind the Perseverance, was missing an entire rear stabilizer fin and was flying perfectly anyway, as if it had simply decided that physics were more of a guideline than a rule. The fleet had not arrived looking like ambassadors. It had arrived looking like survivors, looking like something that had fought its way to this meeting and was very calmly, very quietly daring anyone in the chamber to make a comment about it. 42 species looked at those ships in total silence. It was Ambassador Drax of the Vren who finally spoke. Ambassador Drax was 9 feet tall, covered in natural carbon fiber exoskeleton, and had personally conquered 3 star systems before entering politics. Drax was not easily impressed. Drax was not, in fact, impressed by anything as a matter of philosophical principle. Drax looked at those human ships for a long, quiet moment, and then turned to me and said in a very low voice, "Vora, what happened to their ships?" "I am currently filing an information request," I said, which was technically true because I file information requests the way other species breathe, automatically and constantly. "They were in a battle," said Drax. "Apparently, and they still came." Apparently. Drax made a sound that in Vren culture is the rough equivalent of deeply reluctant respect. It is a very small sound. It is also a sound I had never once heard Drax make in 11 years of shared council sessions. The human shuttle detached from the Perseverance and began its approach to the docking ring. It was a small thing compared to the fleet. Clean lines, efficient. It docked without drama, without ceremony, without any of the elaborate approach protocols that most species use to signal their importance and gravitas. The airlock opened. 4 humans walked out. Now. I had studied humans, I had read the reports, reviewed the xenobiology assessments, examined the cultural databases. I knew, intellectually, what to expect. Bipedal. Bilaterally symmetrical, approximately 1.6 to 1.9 meters tall, relatively soft by galactic standards, no natural armor, no venom, no echolocation, no hive mind, no redundant organ systems, no ability to survive in vacuum or extreme temperature without significant technological assistance. On paper, humans were frankly not very impressive. The 4 humans who walked into the council chamber were wearing dress uniforms, which I gathered was their version of formal diplomatic attire. Dark fabric with geometric precision, medals and insignia that I could not yet read. They walked with the specific, measured, unhurried pace of people who had somewhere important to be and were absolutely certain they would get there, and that anyone in their way would have the good sense to move. The lead human was a woman, and her name, I would later learn, was Commander Adaeze Okonkwo Marsh. She was not tall by human standards. She was not particularly broad-shouldered. She had close-cropped hair and sharp, dark eyes and a jaw set at an angle that my Threlian cultural analysis database could only classify as strongly suggests she has survived things she has not told us about. She walked to the center of the chamber floor. She looked at all 42 species around her, and then she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a diplomatic, placating, please like me smile, a comfortable smile. the smile of someone who had arrived somewhere they fully intended to stay. "Good morning," she said in perfect Galactic standard, with an accent that somehow managed to sound friendly and completely immovable at the same time. Or whatever the local temporal equivalent is. "We are the United Human Nations delegation. We have formally requested membership in this council." She paused just 1/2 second. "We are here to make that case in person." The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever documented. And I have documented a lot of silences. Then Ambassador Drax leaned forward, exoskeleton clicking softly against the armrests of the Vren section throne, and said the question every single species in that chamber was thinking. "Your ships," Drax said. "They are damaged. Before you came here, before this meeting, you were in a conflict." Commander Adazio Conquo-Marsh did not blink. "Yes," she said simply. "And you came anyway." "We had a meeting," she said. The chamber did not erupt. The chamber did something far more alarming. It went very, very quiet. 42 of the most powerful species in the known galaxy sitting in perfect, stunned, recalibrating silence, while 4 humans stood in the center of the room and waited, patiently, for the next question. I wrote 17 words in my notes and then stopped, because I realized with a cold and creeping certainty that I was going to need considerably more paper. This was, I understood with absolute clarity, the beginning of something I did not have a filing category for. Yet, the thing nobody tells you about working in galactic diplomacy is that the job is, 94% of the time, extraordinarily dull. Filing, processing, stamping, translating, attending 3-hour sessions where the Vren and the Dakrux argue about the precise legal definition of territorial waters in a star system that has no water in it anywhere, not even frozen, not even theoretically. I had spent 11 years doing exactly this, and I had been, if I am honest, perfectly content. Contentment is the highest Threllian aspiration. We do not aim for greatness, we aim for a well-organized filing cabinet and a comfortable chair. Commander Adeze Okonkwo-Marsh had been in the council chamber for approximately 9 minutes. And already I could feel my contentment packing its bags. The formal review process for new council membership was, under normal circumstances, a 14-month procedure. There were background assessments, territorial surveys, diplomatic capability evaluations, species threat analyses, and no fewer than 240 separate forms to complete, each in triplicate, each requiring signatures from at least 6 current member ambassadors. It was, by design, an exhausting process. Most species gave up somewhere around Form 70. The Pelorian Confederation had once tried for membership, gotten to Form 112, and then quietly dissolved as a political entity before finishing. It was, I had always thought, a very sensible system for keeping the council exclusive. The humans completed every form in 11 days. 11 days. Pelvo came to my office on the morning of day 12 looking like he had personally witnessed the heat death of the universe. He was holding a data stack so large it required 2 of his 6 limbs just to carry it, and his bioluminescence had gone the pale, flickering blue-white that meant he was operating on no sleep and considerable existential distress. "They submitted everything," he said. I looked up from my own filing. Everything, all 240 forms, correctly completed, cross-referenced, with an additional voluntary supplementary index organized by subject, date, and likely relevance to future council proceedings. He set the stack down on my desk with a thud that rattled my stylus collection. Ambassador Vora. They included a glossary for terms they felt the forms defined ambiguously. He blinked all 4 of his eyes in rapid succession, which was his version of a deeply uncomfortable pause. They also flagged 6 forms that contained internal contradictions and suggested revised language for council consideration. Politely, with footnotes, I stared at the data stack for a long moment. "Pelvo," I said carefully. "Yes, Ambassador. Did they make us look bad?" He considered this with the professional honesty of someone who knew better than to lie to a superior but also very much wanted to. "They made our forms look bad," he said finally. "Which is technically a different thing." It was not, in any meaningful sense, a different thing. The review committee convened on day 15. The committee was chaired by Ambassador Torek of the Sarathi, which was either a neutral choice or a deeply provocative one, depending on your perspective. The Sarathi were telepathic, and Torek had, over 4 decades of diplomatic service, developed what could only be described as a professional appreciation for discomfort. He enjoyed watching species squirm. He was, in my experience, quite good at it. He would not get to enjoy it today. The 4-person human delegation had been expanded. For the formal review to 7, Commander Okonkwo-Marsh remained the lead. She had been joined by a tall, thin human named Dr. Emeka Sule, who was apparently their primary xenobiologist and linguist, and who had in the preceding 11 days learned conversational Threlian well enough to make a small joke in it. I am not going to tell you what the joke was. I will tell you it was funny, which is more than I can say for most jokes Threlians make in Threlian. There was also a woman called Admiral Ife Brima who said almost nothing during the sessions, sat very still, and had the kind of eyes that made you feel she was cataloging everything in the room for future tactical use, which I suspected was precisely what she was doing. The remaining 4 humans were support staff, and I mention them only because they did something extraordinary during the first recess of the review session. They found the council chamber's archival subroom, a room that had not been properly organized since the previous century, and they quietly, without being asked, without any instruction or authorization, simply began sorting and indexing it. Not because it was their job, not because anyone told them to, simply because it was there, and it was a mess, and apparently humans are constitutionally incapable of leaving a mess alone if they have 20 free minutes and access to a shelf. Pelvo discovered them at the end of the recess and stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds before coming to find me. They are organizing the archive, he said. I know. Nobody asked them to. I know. They have also labeled everything in 4 languages, including ours. Pelvo? Yes, Ambassador. Please go back to your desk. Yes, Ambassador. He went. I could tell, from the particular pattern of his bioluminescence as he walked away, that he was having the same thought I was having. That thought being, we are dealing with something we do not have a framework for, and for a species of archivists and bureaucrats, the absence of a framework is a deeply alarming state of affairs. The formal review session resumed, and Ambassador Torek began with what was, even by Sarathi standards, an aggressive opening. The matter of the damaged fleet, he said. His voice the smooth, layered quality of a species that communicates in overtones as much as in words. You arrived at Axis Prime in vessels that had clearly sustained significant combat damage. Before any discussion of membership can proceed, this council requires a full accounting of what conflict you were involved in, with whom, and whether that conflict is ongoing. He let the words sit there with the comfortable weight of someone who fully expected the answer to be complicated and embarrassing and possibly disqualifying. Commander Okonkwo Marsh did not hesitate. 14 months ago, she said, a species calling themselves the Keth Varun moved into a system on our outer frontier. 2 of our colony worlds are in that system. They gave us 48 hours to evacuate before they began bombardment. She paused, very briefly. We did not evacuate. Silence. The engagement lasted 11 months, she continued. During that time, the Keth Varuan committed 4 separate violations of what we consider basic civilized conduct during conflict. We responded proportionally to each violation. The conflict ended 23 days before our delegation departed for Axis Prime, when the Keth Varuan signed a withdrawal agreement. Torek's expression was the practiced neutral of a master diplomat, but I had been watching Sarathi faces for 11 years, and beneath the neutral there was something that looked very much like recalculation. You fought an 11-month war, he said slowly, and then immediately came here. We had a meeting, said Commander Okonkwo Marsh. It was, I noticed, exactly what she had said before. The exact same words, the exact same tone, as if the fact that they had fought an 11-month war in the interim was relevant context but not in any way a reason to miss the meeting. The Keth Varun, said Ambassador Drax, who had been uncharacteristically quiet until this moment, leaning forward with a focus that was almost alarming. We know them. They are not a small force. They have held their territory for 60 years through consistent military aggression. 3 species have attempted to resist them. None succeeded. We are aware of their record, said Commander Okonkwo Marsh. And yet, she agreed with a small, measured nod. Drax made that sound again. That small, quiet, deeply reluctant sound that I had heard for the first time 3 days ago and was now beginning to think might become a recurring feature of my life. Around the chamber I noticed other ambassadors shifting in their seats. Not nervously, thoughtfully. The way you shift when something has rearranged itself in your head and your body has not quite caught up yet. It was Dr. Sull who spoke next, and he did so in a tone that was so gentle and academic that it took me a full 3 seconds to realize he was saying something incendiary. We have, in the course of reviewing council membership requirements, he said, adjusting what I had learned were called glasses on the bridge of his nose, noted that the charter includes provisions for what is termed a founding member override. This is a mechanism by which an existing member species may, under specific conditions, accelerate another species' review on grounds of demonstrated galactic significance. He smiled pleasantly. We were wondering if anyone was considering invoking it. The chamber went quiet in a very specific way. The kind of quiet that happens when someone has said something that everyone was thinking and nobody was supposed to say out loud. Because the founding member override was real. It was in the charter. It had been used exactly twice in 4,000 years of council history, and the conditions for invoking it were precise. The species seeking membership had to have demonstrated, beyond reasonable dispute, that they possessed qualities that were of active benefit to galactic stability, qualities that made waiting 14 months for standard review a waste of everyone's time. Ambassador Torek looked at Dr. Sewell for a long moment with an expression that I think was meant to be withering but came out as something slightly more complicated. "You are aware," Torek said, "that invoking the override requires a 2/3 vote of current members." "We are," said Dr. Sewell. "We are also aware of the current Kethvarun expansion trajectory." He opened his tablet and turned it around so the entire chamber could see the star chart on the screen. "They have been moving consistently toward the inner systems for approximately 20 years. At their current rate of territorial acquisition, they will reach the borders of Ren space in 18 years, Dakrek space in 22. He paused, letting the numbers exist in the air for a moment. "Our 2 colony systems are directly in the path they would need to take to do it, and we are still there." Another silence. This one different from the others. This one had weight to it. "You are proposing," said Ambassador Torek very carefully, "that your presence in that system functions as a buffer." "I am presenting data," said Dr. Sewell with enormous pleasantness. "What the council proposes is entirely the council's business." I wrote 8 words in my notes and then put my stylus down and stared at the ceiling for a moment because I needed to process what had just happened. What had just happened was that 4 humans sitting at a review table in the council chamber had very politely and very calmly explained to 42 of the most powerful species in the galaxy that they were already providing a service the council would otherwise have to negotiate, coordinate, fund, and staff. That they had already, without being asked, without any treaty or obligation or compensation, absorbed 11 months of war against an enemy that 3 other species had failed to resist, simply because those colony worlds were theirs and they were not leaving. And then, with the same pleasant academic tone, they had pointed at a star chart and let the math do the rest. Drax spoke first. "I will invoke the override," Drax said. It was not a proposal. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had already made up their mind and was simply informing the room. The vote was called. I counted. 31 in favor, 8 abstentions, 3 opposed, those being the species whose territorial claims were closest to human space and who were, consequently experiencing a very understandable crisis of strategic confidence. 2/3. More than enough. Commander Okonkwo Marsh received the result with the same expression she had walked in with. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Simply present. Simply ready to move to the next item. "There is one more matter," she said, once the formal results had been recorded. She reached into the case beside her chair and produced something that I had not expected and frankly was not emotionally prepared for. It was a container, a sealed, temperature-maintained container approximately the size of a Threlian archive box. She set it on the table. "We mentioned we brought snacks," she said. The container contained 43 individually wrapped parcels, 1 for each existing member species and 1 extra which Commander Okonkwo Marsh took for herself. Each parcel was carefully labeled in the recipient species' primary language. Each one contained something edible, or at least chemically compatible, selected with apparently precise knowledge of each species' biology, preferences, and cultural associations around food. Pelvo, sitting beside me, opened his parcel to find a selection of baked grain items that he later told me were called shortbread. He ate all of them in under 3 minutes, which for a Threlian is essentially a standing ovation. My own parcel contained a small, dark, extremely intense substance called dark chocolate, accompanied by a card that read, "For the species that handles our paperwork, thank you, we mean it." I sat with that card for a very long time, because here is the thing I have tried to explain to other Threlians since, the thing that does not translate easily into bureaucratic language or xenobiological reports or any of the 17 incident documents I eventually filed about that day. It was not the military record that changed the council. It was not the star chart, or the override vote, or the 11 months of combat against the Kethvarun. Those things mattered. Those things were significant, but what mattered more, what actually shifted something in the accumulated weight of 4,000 years of galactic politics, was this. They came damaged and they came prepared. They came from a war and they brought snacks. They fought an enemy nobody else could stop and then said we had a meeting as though the 2 things were simply items on the same to-do list. They cleaned an archive room nobody asked them to clean. They learned Threlian well enough to make a joke. They sent 40 ships and attached a glossary. They were, simultaneously, the most alarming and the most reasonable species I had ever encountered. They were creatures who had been forged in catastrophe, shaped by 47 extinction events, and had emerged from all of it not hardened into something cold and conquering, but into something else entirely. Something that brought food to meetings, something that organized shelves, something that fought when it had to, and then, the moment the fighting stopped, turned around and made sure everyone had eaten. The formal membership ceremony was held 3 days later. Commander Adaeze Okonkwo Marsh signed the charter on behalf of the United Human Nations with a pen she had brought from Earth, a physical pen with actual ink which she then gave to the Council archive as a diplomatic gift. It is there now. I have filed the receipt. It is, I believe, the only physical artifact in our entire digital archive. I think about that pen sometimes. I think about what it means that the species who survived everything, who crossed interstellar space, who fought off the Keth Varun and arrived at our door with their ships still smoking, chose to mark the moment not with a weapon or a flag or a declaration of strength. They marked it with a pen, something meant for writing things down, something meant for keeping records, something that says we were here and we intend to stay and we are going to put it in writing so nobody forgets. I understood them. In that moment, perhaps better than any other species in that chamber did. I am a Threllian. I believe in documentation above almost all else, and humans, I realized, had been documenting their own survival since before they could read the stars. They were going to fit in here just fine. I filed that thought under observations, diplomatic, unlikely but correct, and then I ordered more styluses, because I had a feeling I was going to need them.